Good evening and welcome to Cooperative Vermont. I'm Matthew Cropp.
And I'm Eric Davis.
And we're coming to you live from VCAM Studios this Sunday, December 12th, 2012, with a pretty packed agenda tonight. We had originally planned on having the head of the Washington Electric Co-op, Avram Pat, come onto the show. Unfortunately, he was not able to make it. He had a schedule conflict this evening, but we're definitely looking forward to having him on for a future show.
Absolutely.
But nonetheless, there's still a whole bunch of interesting things that happened since the last show we did that are of importance to the co-op movement. Do you want to go into a few of those and then sort of go over the overview, and then we'll dive right in?
Absolutely. There's definitely some exciting co-op news coming out in the past couple of weeks. The very exciting announcement for the 2013 Eastern Conference for Workplace Democracy. It's taking place in Philadelphia, July 26th to July 28th, and the theme is growing our cooperatives, growing our communities. So we're hopefully going to have a Vermont delegation attending and discussing cooperatives with the greater sort of Northeast community.
Yeah, and it's sort of an idea we'd been talking about, and if anyone out there who's watching would be interested, definitely head over to our Facebook page and sort of leave a comment or send a message. But the idea of maybe trying to get a group raid on Amtrak or something like that, and really having the Vermont cooperative community kind of go down and back together and really make a weekend out of it in the summer. So that, put that on your calendar. We'll see what the developments, what the interests are in terms of doing something like that. But I definitely think it could be a cool opportunity. So another thing that's kind of come up on our agenda was a really interesting article came out about media bias in cooperatives.
Yes. Yeah. It was a sort of an analysis of how much coverage certain items received in the Wall Street Journal, which is the publication with the greatest sort of reach currently. And this being the International Year of Cooperatives that we just wrapped up, I think there was a hope that maybe there was some coverage in this mainstream paper, and it turns out that cooperatives, that foie gras was mentioned 3 times as much as any cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
in the
Yeah, the article really was interesting as it went through a whole bunch of different categories and was making the point that things like employee ownership and cooperatives and all these interesting models that people have been trying to raise awareness of, and way more people say are members of credit unions and own shares in mutual funds, and yet mutual funds were mentioned at a rate, I think it was in excess of 100 times that of credit unions.
Right.
So it just kind of highlighted this sort of systematic bias where there are more people involved in cooperative institutions, but oftentimes these kind of luxury goods and more hierarchical institutions that fewer people actually have power in receive a great deal more coverage. So that was an interesting, I thought, way of kind of framing one of the challenges that we face with this whole project of kind of growing the cooperative movement, getting people more involved in co-ops and getting them aware of co-ops. Is if they aren't seeing co-ops in the media, they aren't really aware, most people won't be aware of what the actual impact of this model is, and they're just going to assume things about the economy that aren't true.
Right. And also, sort of locally, the Granite City Medical Associates came out with a statement of support for the Granite City Grocery, the consumer cooperative that is in the sort of startup phase, and it's a great example of sort of a cooperative building the social capital in the local community.
So like with Granite City Grocery, we've been following them for a little bit, mentioned them on previous shows. Emily Sanders Kaminsky, who's one of the main organizers, came to the Vermont New Economy Conference. And it looks like they're really drawing in a lot of diverse supporters, from the Barrie community. You've got the natural food people, you've got the kind of local Main Street businesses, you've got like a lot of different groups of people kind of coming and being voices at the table on this project.
Right.
And so this is kind of one more example of kind of another group stepping forward and saying like, yeah, like Barre would be a better city with a downtown food co-op, and we're going to sort of lend our support to that and say that we're throwing in.
Right.
And as more and more people throw in, they're believe approaching their goal is to have 300 committed members by the end of the year, by January 1st, with a total goal of 600 to raise the necessary capital to really get moving.
And Emily Sanders Kaminsky is also coming on the show, I believe.
Yes. She'll be coming on the show along with Michael Healy, who's a local kind of cooperative development consultant. I think later on next month. I believe it's the 27th of January. So it's a really, really interesting project. I think they're doing a really great job down there. And it's if people out there are interested in supporting it, I've signed a pledge that when they hit that 600, I will buy a $200 share to kind of help support it. And I work in Barre on Thursday, so it'd be nice to go and get my lunch at a co-op. So yeah, if anyone else out there watching is interested in supporting this endeavor, you can just look on Google for Granite City Grocery or Granite City Cooperative, and you can find their website and sign a pledge to put your money where your mouth is and your values are, and help get Barre a food co-op. And sort of another thing that's kind of, if Barre is to Montpelier in some ways, how kind of Winooski is to Burlington, and the sort of way it relates. Burlington and Montpelier have food co-ops, Barre and Winooski don't, are more low income. So there's actually been talk now of City Market trying to open a new store. It was originally they were talking about the South End, but haven't been able to find a space. So now word is that they're looking at either the new North End or Winooski. So that should be. It will be interesting to see. They've also said that they would support an independent co-op startup. So I think there's a possibility that we could see a City Market supported food co-op starting in Winooski maybe in the next few months, probably modeled off of the process that they've been using to sort of build community support in Barre.
Huh, I hadn't heard of that second part. That's really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they've indicated that they'd be willing to support it. So I mean, and there's been kind of groups. I know a group of people has been kind of working on it for a few years, and there's other people I've been hearing just kind of murmurs that that's in the works. So kind of keep your eye on definitely Barre as the model and Winooski as perhaps the first imitator. But yeah, that sort of, I think, segues into our, because we saw Emily at the New Economy Conference, we can kind of go into a little maybe discussion about what that was and where that came from, and if you want to take that.
Sure. So Cooperative Vermont had a presence at the New Economy Conference. It was a conference that was designed on an open space sort of technique, which was very interesting. It let the conference participants really drive the discussion and the agenda. So Cooperative Vermont proposed a session on cooperative ownership, which Emily was a part of, and that was a really great discussion. I thought it brought together a sort of diverse group of people that were passionate about cooperatives and with all sorts of experience in different cooperatives.
And I thought that was one of the great things about the format of the conference, the whole open space idea, was that if we had just been like, hey, let's have an hour and a half meeting and discussion about co-ops, we might have gotten 3 or 4 people in the room. But because it was several hundred people who were all there to chat about a number of different things, then we could just sort of be like, all right, who at this conference wants to get together for an hour and rap about this? And we were able to get probably a good 25, 30, I think probably 25 or so people part of that discussion. And the diversity was incredible. We had the director of the Vermont Employee Ownership Center to sort of speak to worker co-ops. We had a board member from the Plainfield Co-op and Emily Sanders Kaminsky to talk about food co-ops. Right. We had some people involved in energy cooperatives, cooperative renewable energy initiative down in southern Vermont. So really there
agricultural cooperatives.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah,
as well. So
it was really kind of the vision of the show is based around the idea of kind of bringing the voices of the cooperative movement together to like talk about what's going on and advance its interests. And I felt like that meeting really embodied what we've been trying to do, and that we had that diversity.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there was also some discussion there that sort of strikes me as being linked to that sort of media bias that we were talking about earlier. The different thinking that's required to really wrap your head around what a cooperative is. And I thought that was some really interesting discussion that came out.
Yeah, it was the sort of thing where it started off as a question of like, okay, how do you do education? How do you get people involved? And that was a question coming out of the woman who was on the board of the Plainfield Co-op, was the sense of like, they're a small co-op and pretty democratic, but she nonetheless kind of felt some level of concern about the sort of how to continue that, how to promote, how to make that democracy stick, I guess you could say. And so we were able to get into a really interesting conversation about the different roles, but the difference between the role of being a customer at a for-profit business versus a member at a consumer co-op, or an employee at a for-profit business versus a member owner at a worker co-op.
Right.
And just sort of like what does it take to actually sort of learn that each role has a different set of expectations and incentives and behavior, and not just walk into a role that requires the member set and just instinctively use the set that's a customer, which is actually a set of maladaptive behaviors if you're dealing with a co-op.
Right, right.
And shout out to Cecile Green for facilitating.
She did a great job.
Yeah, she did a really great job. I thought that one of the participants commented afterwards to me that he hadn't been in a meeting that had people coming from so many different places that had run that smoothly in a very long time. Because you definitely had people who had fundamentally different worldviews, and nonetheless it was like a civil and I felt like on-track productive conversation.
Absolutely. And there was a whole session on employee ownership after the cooperative session.
Yeah, Don Jameson, the Employee Ownership Center, and I believe I'm fortunately blanking on the other person's name, but there's a new staffer there as well. The two of them came and they facilitated something on employee ownership, which I heard was pretty fantastic. And also another project that's coming up, sort of involving not starting a co-op, but starting a new initiative at a co-op, also came out of a session at that conference. I decided to go to the one on time banking, which is essentially this, they have a time bank in central Vermont called the Onion River Exchange. And it's just, the idea is that you can sort of it's sort of an alternative current or complementary currency scheme in which you can put on this website, you can open an account and say, okay, here are things that I'm good at and would be willing to do for other people. And other people could see your little listing and say, oh, someone's really good at detailing cars. My car really needs to be cleaned. So you have the person detail a car. If they spend an hour on it, they get an hour credit that they can then use that hour credit to sort of essentially purchase the services of anyone else in the network, and so on.
Right. Which
is a really interesting model for the way it's set up. Like at the moment, it's considered tax exempt, unlike normal barter, because it's all sort of voluntary. So that's kind of one cool piece. But it's for a number of reasons, it's really interesting. And so a group of us got together, and I guess there had been a time bank in Burlington, but it had gone defunct, and so had a discussion about, well, this would be kind of cool if we had one of these in Burlington. And the idea came up of, okay, well, what if we didn't try to totally reinvent the wheel, but tried to sort of have it be implemented by an existing institution? And conversation turns to like, okay, what are good existing institutions? And we sort of honed in on City Market, because it has 8,000 members, already has an online presence, has a member worker program.
Right.
So it's used to sort of engaging with its members. It's probably one of the more, for a big co-op, one of the more engaging cooperative organizations that I know of, in terms of its relationship to its members. So the idea was, hey, let's make it so the City Market would just sort of install this open source software and set up a time banking account for each one of its members. Now, you wouldn't have to use it or anything, but it would just be sort of an extra thing that would be available. And if even 10% of the members of the City Market members started using it, it would become as large as the Onion River Exchange.
And
so
that's in the greater Montpelier
yes,
area?
Montpelier, Barrie, sort of all sort of central Vermont. And so like hitting that sort of critical mass, and the more people are part of the network, the more valuable the network is to everybody. So rather than trying to start from something where basically no one had services that anyone else wanted, start with an existing cooperative organization. So we've drawn up a proposal, and we'll be actually going to the City Market Board meeting tomorrow to present it. City Market is one of those awesome co-ops that actually has open board meetings, so members can come and pitch ideas, and that's exactly what we're doing. And it should be a really, really interesting time. So if you think that's a cool idea and you're out there watching and would like to check that out, or go along and be in support of that idea, sounds like they're at least open to it, to hearing the proposal. So it'll be should be an interesting time tomorrow.
Good luck with that. It's a really interesting idea. It creates all this sort of resiliency in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a large part of what cooperatives do, is they're sort of counter-cyclical. They're there for, they're there to help support members through, or they help support members through sort of economic times that might not be great, and that sort of creates this whole layer of resiliency in the Vermont economy.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting too, sort of kind of taking it from the perspective of the cooperative, and I think this sort of thing would actually have a lot of benefit for cooperative organizations, because they essentially are, both economic and social, and so that the more the members sort of identify with the cooperative, sort of see it as sort of its interests as aligning with their own, the more they can activate to sort of advance this interest, whether that means promoting it to their friends, whether that means if there's in terms of, say, a credit union, if there's a financial regulation that's being proposed that would be really bad for credit unions, like mobilizing the members to actually defend the organization politically. And I think sort of by providing this sort of service in which people are helping each other, and it's enriching the lives of the members, and it's being done sort of under the banner of the cooperative, then I think that would be a great way of kind of building member loyalty. So I think it's not something that should be understood as like, oh, this would be nice for members, but might have a drag on the cooperative's core mission. But I think it would, strengthen the co-op and make it more able to advance its mission rather than less.
I wasn't at that session. Who was sort of organizing that session?
It was a group of people who are involved with the Onion River Exchange.
Okay.
So people who are active time bankers who are into the idea, are the ones who help run the infrastructure and really boost it. So they would, people with kind of practical hands-on experience of the system.
That's awesome. That's
yeah.
awesome.
So that was a pretty encouraging conference overall. I felt like I've been to some conferences where I leave and I feel like, oh, everything is pretty much the same. There's nothing new coming out of this. Maybe I learned a little bit, but this one I felt like there's just creativity bursting forth in all directions. People were ready to do something new after the experience.
Absolutely, yeah. There was a great group of people there, even outside the cooperative sort of group. That was, the movement towards a new economy is really exciting.
Yeah, and that's is part of this larger thing that I hadn't even realized had been kind of named, but there's some people calling it the kind of new economy movement. And it's this sort of loose definition doesn't have a super ideological feel to it, but it's more about people who are tinkering with the hands-on, how do you actually create institutions that are more just and based on these kind of cooperative principles and are not oppressive, etc.
Right. I think that was another term they analyzed in that media bias article as well, the new economy.
So another thing that also actually relating to City Market, it's a smaller thing before we get into probably the biggest co-op news of that's going on right now, involving multi-million-dollar institution in Burlington. But City Market had its Christmas tree sale from December 5th to the 15th, and I put in, I think, a total of about 8 hours. So I've got two glorious months of 12% off my groceries. But it got me really thinking about member work. And for those of you who aren't super familiar, the City Markets has this program where if you kind of do 2 hours of member work at the co-op, you get 7% off your groceries. Right. You do 4 hours, you get 12% off. And there's a huge number of things you can do, everything from like stocking shelves and bagging groceries to helping with sample tables to doing to working with nonprofits that City Market sponsors.
Right.
So like you go down, like do some work at the Intervale and get member worker hours.
That's where I do my hours, and I really enjoy it.
But this Christmas tree sale is probably my favorite thing of the year. It benefits COTS, the homeless shelter, and it's going out and selling Christmas trees and tying them with twine to the top of people's cars, and it's the sort of thing you are outside and you end up smelling like pine, and it's just a kind of generally good time.
Nice.
But it was something that made me think of, I think that same dynamic that they're talking about with the time bank, but sort of building the connections between the members and thus making the co-op itself stronger. I think that sort of member work thing is a really powerful tool for that.
Absolutely. It really sort of deepens your relationship between members, and gets you talking with other members about the cooperative, and it sort of reinforces that participatory aspect.
Yeah, like and it even sort of brings third-party things or organizations in too. So like the last time I was working the tree sale, I was working with a woman named Sky, who it turns out was actually another member of the Intervale Community Farm Co-op, which is the consumer-owned farm down at the Intervale. One of the farmers from which we're actually going to be having on the next episode, along with a farmer from the Diggers Mirth Collective Farm. So it turns out we were both members of this co-op, and we got to talking, as we were moving Christmas trees around, talking about sort of ideas for the co-op. And that conversation, that relationship, now I friended her on Facebook, and she seemed to be very thoughtful and interested in that sort of thing. And maybe some of the ideas that we talked about might actually now happen. And without that sort of member work program bringing people together into spaces where they can meet each other, where they can sort of talk in the context of the larger cooperative institution and the larger cooperative movement, without those sorts of interactions and the sense of community they generate, co-ops are definitely weaker than they otherwise would be.
Right. Did you find a home for Rupert, by the way?
I did not, unfortunately. Yes, there's one tree that I was especially attached to and wanting to find a home on the last day of the sale when there were only 6 left. So it was slim pickings, but I believe he did ultimately find one.
That's nice.
Yeah. All right. So now we've got we had for the very first episode of our show. So if you head over to the Facebook page and scroll back, you can find on YouTube the first episode in which we interviewed Don Schramm about the initiative to turn Burlington Telecom, the city's municipally owned telecom company that has all sorts of financial issues with it currently, into a member-owned co-op. So we had that conversation, got the word out a little bit, and the co-op had its first main organizing meeting on this last Thursday, and it was really well attended. There were probably upwards of more than 50 people there. And it was a really diverse group of people, a lot of people I'd never met before, but all sort of interested in this idea of, essentially mutualizing Burlington Telecom.
Up to that point, there wasn't a lot of publicity too.
Right.
So that's really great turnout for a weeknight.
Yeah, no, it was it seemed to have some really good energy. And there's one person who, when Don came on, we were actually also he was thinking about coming on, but ultimately couldn't make it. Alan Matson, who gave a short talk at the beginning. Most of the meeting was actually breaking up into these working groups. There's a finance and legal one, a marketing one, a street team, member recruitment one, to sort of work out some of the nuts and bolts of what needs to be done. But beforehand, a few of the people who've been involved in the early planning stages got up and gave little talks about what they were bringing to the table. There's someone who kind of analyzed the survey that they did and kind of went through the data there. Don got up and gave his impression of how everything fit together. And then I had a little video camera with me and took video of Alan's little presentation about kind of his pitch for why this makes sense. So I think we'll watch that video. It's about, I think, 7 or 8 minutes long. And then when we get back, we'll talk a little bit more about what are the next steps, what are the reactions to this event. But I think this is going to be, a pretty important thing in the next few months as it really seems to be moving forward quickly.
Yeah.
So we'll catch that video and we'll see you shortly.
How did we get here? Why did we decide that we wanted to have a co-op? Why did we want to get after Burlington Telecom, which the story is well known amongst this group, is a real difficult proposition to go after? And it really came to me, I would say a bit more than a year ago, when I was thinking, Burlington Telecom is great. I have it in my house. I have it at my office. It is a fantastic product. I've never had better speeds. I've never had a telecom that in fact has had fewer problems. I use it for phone. I use it for data. I don't watch any television, so I don't have cable. But it's been a great product. And I saw in the landscape that there just was not a lot of positive going on. A lot of positive conversation going on in the city talking about Burlington Telecom. I also thought to myself, what's going to happen? There's a lot of things going on. There are certainly these financial issues. But what's going to happen? Because the city and city capital are going to have to come together at some point and try to figure out what's going to go on. And if that issue could get settled, first off, what would it take to get it settled? It would probably take some money. But what's going to happen if that does get settled? And my concern was that this telecom could well end up just being, in effect, sold to some third party, perhaps even to a second party that we know well already in town, but that the value of this fantastic product could well leave the town. And my background led me to start thinking about cooperatives. I was on the board of the City Market Cooperative for a number of years, and one of the things that I realized with cooperatives is that you build a tremendously loyal customer base. And then I thought about Burlington Telecom. And I said, what's it really going to take to turn around Burlington Telecom at some point? And, what's interesting is it has a pretty loyal customer base already. One of the great strengths of Burlington Telecom is not just the product that it provides, but it also has 4,000 customers. And those 4,000 customers, if you're able to cut down the churn rate in the telecom industry, is one of the great ways to maintain value in a telecom. The lower the churn rate, the higher the value of a telecom. So if we could create a cooperative with a highly loyal customer base that builds on the existing customer base, we could create a telecom that there could be a value that nobody else could capture other than a co-op. A number of us came together by chance, by conversation, and for more than a year have had conversations around town, have explored as much information as we can get our hands on to see, is this really valid? Is it really valid? I mean, the question is open. Does it have any value? Is it worth going after? And in our investigations over the past year, it became pretty clear that yes, it does have value. I don't want to speak directly to numbers right now, but it's been enough to encourage us to have many conversations with city parties and various other parties about what can be done and at what price. And we know we're not alone. And if you go and read public filings that are filed with the state, or if you take a look at any of a number of other places, such as when Burlington Telecom makes presentations to the City Council or the Board of Finance, there's a lot of information out there that indicates there's other interested parties. We can see the customer base. We can see that the product mix and the way the business is currently being run has value. But it is true that the customer base has come down, given all the notifications that have gone on in the past couple of years. And that means we're probably sitting at a relatively low value for what this telecom really is worth. And once again, that made us think, well, that would be the wrong time for something to happen to Burlington Telecom, for a third-party transaction to occur. And I guess that does raise the question of, what would this look like? What would the ownership look like? And I suppose one possible ownership could be that it would stay within the city, but I think that the politics, and I think even some of the needs of a competitive company make it very difficult to keep this company a municipally owned company. We have open meeting law. We have political votes that occur on a regular basis where it moves certain people in and certain people out, and creating a new set of bosses for Burlington Telecom at all times. And our view was it's going to be difficult, not impossible, for it to stay municipal. But where could be that local, that broad-based, popular ownership that really this was designed to serve? And I've already discussed that's another way that we got to the cooperative view. So here we are tonight. We've decided that we need to get out at this point in time and make a statement and say, hey, everybody, this is a great, great product. We need to get out and make sure that this company can be kept local. As we read some of the other documents that are out there, the city and city capital have litigation going on that is progressing. And there are timelines that I think there are going to be points in time where there are potential opportunities both for the city and perhaps for an outside party to put themselves in a position to help create maybe a settlement. I don't know if that's possible, but it seems like there's a timeline out there where it could work. And we felt like we needed to start getting out and talking in the public about these ideas that we've been working on for several, not just several months, but long prior to the last mayor election back into last fall, to say, here's what's going on. We think there are people out there. When we've talked around in quiet, people have been supportive of the idea. But we need to build the support. We need to build the support amongst residences. We need to build the support among businesses so that we can all come together to put together a viable offer for this company. Because it's going to take not just time, but we're going to have to put together some financing to do this. And for those of you familiar with cooperatives often create a lot of organic financing. And that's going to be a key piece of what we do. But it probably won't be enough. We're going to need to build that organic base over the next couple months that will be spoken to. And that organic base will be used to leverage additional financing, potentially from traditional sources, such as banks, potentially from non-traditional sources, such as direct investment from businesses, and even further afield, we may see other potential opportunities for various financial institutions to come in and really help create a local Vermont telecom that provides a fantastic service that's seen only in very few places outside Burlington in this entire country, and where it does show up in places such as Kansas City and Chattanooga. Also, great things are happening with the backbone that's created by this form of telecom. That's what I have to say. It's this where we've been, how we got here, what we're looking to do.
So, any reactions to that video from the recent meeting concerning turning Burlington Telecom into a co-op that happened in Burlington on Thursday?
Well, thank you for filming that, because I was out of town, and I'm very interested to see that meeting. Well, I think it's great. The public has already invested so much into Burlington Telecom. And I think Alan there makes a great point that at the time, at the moment, it's sort of a depressed asset given the financial trouble. So if it was to be sold, would the city and would Burlingtonians be getting a fair return on what they've already invested? I can't imagine that would be the case. So why not keep it in Burlington and keep it controlled by Burlingtonians? We set the values, and the organizations responsible for serving those citizens.
Now, I think it's kind of offers a really interesting third way to the whole conundrum, because up until now, pretty much the narrative has been it's either going to remain owned by the city or it's going to be sold off to the highest bidder, third party investor who might want to, could be like Comcast or something, it just gets absorbed into Comcast or Fairpoint, and we all have to deal with having our internet provided by Comcast or Fairpoint. But I think it sort of offers this thing where, okay, it takes it out from underneath the city, so it stops being a political football. It will be kicked back and forth, and it'll instead be, its own standalone entity that's its concern is Burlington Telecom, not Burlington Telecom and who's mayor and who's head of CEDO and all of that. That becomes less relevant to its existence. So it sort of enters the private sector to a certain extent, but it also does so in a way that doesn't concentrate ownership, but rather says, okay, so all these subscribers, have a stake in receiving the service, and so let's make them the owners.
In that way, it would probably be under that ownership structure, probably much more responsive to the citizens of Burlington.
Right.
At the moment, it's sort of, citizens don't directly have a say. It's through the Burlington Telecom Advisory Board and City Council, and
right.
So
as opposed to having an annual meeting and having the members vote on who sits on the board of the telecom that then hires and supervises the management and sets policies and all of that. So I think that this is a huge move in the right direction, and if they can actually pull this off and maintain local ownership and affect the transfer, I think this will be kind of one of the biggest sort of initiatives in the world of Vermont cooperatives in a very long time.
Absolutely. This is certainly new territory.
Mm-hmm.
And you point out, you make a great point that it could revert to being controlled by sort of a large corporate interest that has sort of profit at its center rather than servicing the local citizens. And it wasn't very long ago that was the case.
Right.
And I think Burlington, by and large, would agree that it's much better served by this sort of local entity.
Mm-hmm.
So, keeping control local and more responsive to the people of Burlington, I think would be great.
Yeah, and it's something where so after at the meeting itself, after Don Schramm spoke before him, and then he spoke, and then several other people sort of threw in their 2 cents, and then we broke up for a little more than an hour into working groups. And so the working groups that we had were, kind of public relations and marketing, kind of the street team, member recruitment, legal and finance, and then one that was the SWAT team, which is strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and
threats.
Threats, yes. So they sort of got together and just sort of had a conversation, with those 4 things as the themes, developing a list of what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses, what are the opportunities, what are the threats. And so I and a number of other people who I know sort of are kind of heavily involved with co-op stuff specifically. It was interesting kind of how the community that came together kind of self-segregated a bit into these working groups. But so, Mungo Jelly and Taylor Woodard was there. Don Schramm was facilitating. Actually, I think Elizabeth Curry, or Liz Curry, I think, who manages housing cooperatives for the Champlain Housing Trust. Mm-hmm. She was part of that conversation too. So broke out, sort of kind of did a visioning session on what is it we would like, what is it that a cooperative Burlington Telecom looks like, what would change, and we had some really interesting discussions about really using technology to create direct democracy, or like avenues for direct democracy. So say, if voting on policies, having something almost like Reddit where you can vote up or vote down policies, and if you can get enough members to sort of upvote something, it is put forward as an official proposal and things like that. So really sort of trying to push the limits on what's possible in terms of including members in the decisions that affect them. And the idea was also emerged of one of the benefits of coming out from under the city of Burlington would be that it wouldn't be arbitrarily constrained by the boundaries of the city. So it could actually start expanding service to Winooski and Colchester and Williston and Shelburne, and actually become a regional cooperative rather than being very narrowly kind of, this is a city of Burlington thing, and it provides telecom services to the city of Burlington and nowhere else. So there were a lot of different kind of visions that people had and sort of ideas of how this could be made. Setting up a mesh network was another idea, which kind of feeds into that cooperatives providing resiliency, because essentially if we had a mesh network and the internet went down, local sort of, you could still connect to anyone who is part of the Burlington mesh network. And this has been proposed by some groups of like techies for a while now, the idea, but actually potentially sort of having this be an initiative the cooperative could take on. So there's definitely, I got a sense of people seeing this as something that wouldn't just be, hey, all right, we're going to maintain the service that we have, but actually having it be a vector for kind of new and interesting initiatives that would make Burlington a more dynamic place.
I think there is a lot of opportunity out there as well, because I can remember when Burlington Telecom started up and being very excited about when it was going to get to my neighborhood and when could I start service, and then having to move to South Burlington for a few years and just being so sad that I had to go back to a corporate provider of telecom service and not a local one. And there's the democratic control is amazing, and local control, and I think what you brought up there, the participatory aspects, that's really exciting. There's also just the economics of it. We sort of, in Vermont, we value local production highly. We've seen our local food system be very successful, and under a corporate structure, the profits are generally move outside of Burlington, and through a cooperative structure, we're able to keep that in Burlington.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, and it's so the group that I was in after we finished that sort of discussion about larger, like what could this project really create, and got a little excited about that. We then moved into the nitty-gritty of what do we need to do. And the goal that was put out, and I think it seems something that's like ambitious but still achievable, and is that the goal is to recruit 1,000 members and raise $500,000 in initial sort of resources by February 1st. And so then this discussion was a lot about how to do this. So the general idea is, or the goal is to have half of that, so $250,000 in member equity. So for instance, at City Market or a credit union, if you're a member of a credit union, you essentially, when you join the cooperative, you buy a share. And that share entitles you to full voting rights. If the cooperative makes a profit like City Market does, then you get a check at the end of the year, all that stuff.
right.
So the idea is sort of they set the price of a share at $250. If we can get 1,000 members, the co-op, then they will call in those shares. Ideally, sort of because it's a startup and needs the money, if people can pay their shares in all at once, that's better, but also with the option of paying $25 a month until it's paid up. And then the other $250,000 will hopefully be made up of member loans. So there's all sorts of arcane financial regulations about who can invest in what.
Right.
But one thing that cooperatives are allowed to do is if you are allowed to directly receive loans from your own members. So if someone's a member of your cooperative, they can make a loan to the co-op. And they said that the BISHCA, which is the regulator that covers this sort of thing, essentially sort of said they could probably take loans from any particular individual up to $65,000. So the idea would be it's a 10-year loan, so it'll be paid back at the end of 10 years, and you pick your interest rate, anything from 0% if you're really supportive and can afford to just put some money in and support this thing because you want to see it happen, up to 4% as the rate of return on this money. And so we're in the middle. I've sort of been helping with this, creating a form that would just be sort of a pledge form that when the co-op hits the membership number of members goal and officially incorporates and elects a board of directors, then the call will go out to call in the pledges and get things rolling for real. And the idea is if that can be done by February 1st, the co-op will be in a position to sort of realistically bargain with the city and say, look, like we have 1,000 people behind this, we have resources, and this is our starting point. We can continue expanding from here, but like we're for serious. This isn't a few people. And I think a few people just kind of brainstorming. This has serious community support behind it at that point. And there's a number of ways that. So first of all, if anyone's watching and wants to throw their pledge in, the pledge form should be going online, in its kind of completed form tomorrow. You can check out the Green Mountain Fiber Cooperative website. You can go to their Facebook page. We'll be posting it on the cooperative, a link on the Cooperative Vermont Facebook page as soon as it comes out. And yeah, just spread the word to friends, anyone you know who's interested in making sure that Burlington Telecom stays locally controlled and make it actually more democratic than it is now. This is a really good thing to support. And so some of the strategies for getting the word out. City Market actually for the meeting on Thursday actually put in its newsletter an announcement of the meeting. So
Oh, wow.
The idea is to possibly approach City Market about putting as sort of a co-op to co-op support thing, putting sort of a stack of the applications in a box for you to put them in if you want to do a paper one. Going to try to approach credit unions and see if they would be willing in Burlington, if they'd be willing to do similar things. So really try to bring the other co-ops in Burlington sort of into line to support this initiative. Potentially even sort of look at them trying to provide financing too. There's going to be possibly door knocking. Certainly, like a lot of people at the meeting sort of committed to try to recruit 5 members to sort of help the process along, and just really sort of doing almost like a traveling show to the churches and pretty much anywhere where you've got people coming together to sort of bring people into the conversation and build that support. One other strategy that I think will be really interesting is as there's a city council election coming up in March, I believe. Some folks are going to be approaching all of the candidates and asking if they endorse it, and if they do endorse it, asking if they're going door to door as they go door to door to leave a flyer for the campaign along
Right.
with their campaign literature. So kind of putting them on the spot and saying, okay, do you support this? If you do, really, then please hand these out, and if you don't, that's probably a strike against you in the election because there's a lot of people who are going to be supportive of this. So kind of bringing knowledge and understanding that support exists to the people who are partially responsible for where it gets sold and what the settlement with city capital looks like, et cetera.
It'll be interesting to see how this develops as well with the sort of swell of media coverage around the meeting. When we had Dawn on, I wouldn't say that the media had really sort of had a focus on this sort of movement. And in the past couple of days, there was a story on VPR and the Burlington Free Press, WCAX has been covering it. So it'll be interesting to see how the community responds to this.
Yeah, no, I think it was the sort of thing where when I walked in that room and saw the diversity of people there and the number of cameras and media, it suddenly sort of went from something that was like a good idea that should happen to something that really felt like it can happen. It's going to require a lot of work. It's going to require people stepping forward. But if people are able to, if enough people do that, I think it has the potential to actually sort of create something really cool. And there's, I think, a shared sense of that kind of optimism in the room. Mm-hmm. And so then this media coverage is also kind of, I think, echoing that kind of hope, kind of guardedly optimistic tone. Although, so the most recent piece that I saw, the level of media coverage and I think the level of public support has forced our very own Mayor Moreau to make a comment that was, the comment he made to VPR seemed very sort of, weaselly, politician-y, in which he made a statement about along the lines of he can't imagine a deal ever going through without a private partner, which definitely was not the full-throated endorsement of a co-op that folks might have been hoping for.
Right, and hopefully it will have many private partners in the form of citizens around Burlington.
Yeah, in the form of co-op members.
Right, exactly.
But so that's one of those things where. Thinking about kind of the who he might have in mind when he's saying private partners. We haven't heard anything publicly, but if there's ever a chance for kind of the closed door backroom politics, I think negotiating over the privatization of a troubled, sort of public telecom infrastructure would be the place that someone would go.
Hopefully the citizens of Burlington will sort of direct policy by expressing
Yeah.
themselves.
I think that's, again, sort of the idea of if you can get 1,000 people who aren't just signing their names to a petition, but are saying, I will put a substantial amount of money down on the table too, then that's really saying something. That's
Right.
That's something that's very hard for the political leadership of the city to ignore. So that gives me some hope. So if folks are interested in getting involved again, check out our Facebook page. We'll have a link to the pledge form, and you can also follow the project on the Green Mountain Fiber Facebook page, and they've got Twitter and a website, and so they've it's a techie project, so they've got all the bells and whistles on their online presence.
And we'll keep everyone updated at Cooperative Vermont on Facebook as well.
But yeah, so the other working groups seem to also come out with have pretty productive discussions, and at the end there was it seemed like there was a pretty good sense of these groups kind of specializing and taking on different pieces of the project. And now that it's really hit the media and the city started to react, it'll be interesting to see what the next moves will be in terms of the in terms of the kind of pending case between the city council and the city of Burlington, and sort of these other things. I think if there are any other potential buyers who've been waiting and lurking in the woodwork, this is going to be, it seems like if they perceive this to be now rolling, this will be their time to sort of start moving and building their case to sell it to them rather than to the people of Burlington.
Right.
So, again, something to be aware of, and I think that is going to be a continuing story for Cooperative Vermont to be following in the coming weeks and months.
What could be interesting, I'm realizing, is with town meeting coming up, if there could be sort of a grassroots level of a non-binding ballot initiative where the citizens of Burlington instruct the city to consider a cooperative.
That's a very good idea that I actually haven't heard suggested yet. So, and I believe that with those initiatives, you can either do it by petition or by having people, having the city council can also put those non-binding resolutions on the ballot. So it'd be interesting to sort of see what the city council's response would be to that sort of request.
Were there city councilors at the meeting?
I did not notice any.
Okay.
There were. There was a good mix of folks, but there were none that I recognized. I can't say that I would recognize all of the Burlington city councilors, but yeah. So at the moment, I really think it'll be interesting to see what positions they stake out on this.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
So yeah, and so I'll have to actually check on when that city council meeting, the next city council meeting is, because that might not be a bad thing for public comment.
Right.
But yeah, so any other cooperative news beyond this, or any other thoughts on the BT thing before we move on?
Well, I had a conversation over the past week that I found very interesting with a gentleman that's sort of associated with the Gross National Happiness Project. So this project to sort of look into alternative indicators.
Yet another one of the sessions at the New Economy Conference
right,
on that topic.
Right,
yeah.
And he was there and he was hosting those sessions, so we didn't get to interact there. But in subsequent conversations, apparently he teaches a class on the psychology of cooperation.
Interesting.
So it speaks to that conversation that we were having in our cooperative group. So.
Yeah, no. If we could have him on as a guest, that would be a really interesting conversation.
Right.
Because I feel like because cooperatives are organizations, it's often the conversation tends to be either really concrete or focusing on the sort of macro, kind of more sociological manifestations of the organizational form. But kind of thinking about what is the psychology of cooperating? What is the psychology? versus competing, for instance. Like, I think that could be a very, very enlightening conversation. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left in the show, and maybe I was thinking maybe we could just talk a little bit about the next episode we've got coming up, which is one I'm particularly excited about.
Great.
We'll be coming back. We do the show every 2 weeks, so we'll be coming back on the 30th with a really interesting conversation with two farmers who work in the Intervale. Andy, who's the farmer at the Intervale Community Farm, and the Intervale Community Farm is a really fascinating model because it's a consumer cooperative. So it's owned by the people, and it's a CSA farm, so community supported agriculture, so you get a share. But most CSAs are owned by the farmer, and the farmer sells shares of the crop. What the Intervale Community Farm is it's actually the farm, the people who buy the crop also own the farm itself. And the farmer is then employed by the cooperative of consumers.
Interesting.
So it's, I believe, like from what I've looked around, I think it's the only farm that's run on that model in the whole country.
Because usually you would have the producer co-op sort of in that situation. Different.
So they farm land down at the Intervale. They're sort of expanding. Seem to be doing pretty well. They just took over some new land that had been used by Intervale Compost before they moved out to Williston. Yeah. So they've taken over those fields and are sort of adding new things, and they're even talking about adding I think district heat because it's near the Moran, or not the Moran plant, the McNeil power plant, which sort of having the waste heat greenhouses. So they're doing some really interesting work. And then Hillary, who is one of the members of the Diggersmirth farm down there, which is run as a collective. So all the people who work there kind of have an equal ownership stake in the farm. So you've got kind of the worker cooperative model, the employee-owned model, and the consumer-owned model, sort of right next to each other, both growing food to feed the hungry people of Burlington.
Right.
And so I think this coming episode will be really interesting, and that we'll be able to get the sort of a sense of like what is each of those models like, to actually work in. What are the pros, what are the cons? Like when, say, like for instance, risk sharing in the CSA versus maybe a greater sense of control in the worker co-op. Those are just speculations, but I think it's going to be a really cool conversation.
That's really interesting to have two organizations sort of organized differently around a cooperative structure, but in the same sector, and they happen to be next to each other as well.
Yeah. So if you're interested, well, that will be from 7 to 8 p.m. on Sunday, January 30th. Should be, and so we'll be, if you're watching and want to get in touch or would like to have your co-op or a co-op that you're involved that you know of discussed or want to come on the show, we're always looking for new guests, so feel free to get in touch. You can go to our Facebook page, or I think it's Cooperative, I think it's Coop Vermont @gmail.com. So if you want to send an email that way as well. So until next week, I think we're about out of time, but I'm Matthew Cropp.
And I'm Eric Davis.
And you've been watching Cooperative Vermont. Good night.